Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Ivana Chrysalia Rehatalanit. I'm from State University of Makassar. Here I will present my resume about a methodical history of language teaching. Approach, method, and technique. About 4 decades ago, Edward Anthony gave us a definition that has admirably withstood the test of time. His concept of method was the second of 3 hierarchical elements, namely approach, method, and technique. An approach, according to Anthony, was a set of assumptions dealing with the nature of language, learning, and teaching. Method was described as an overall plan for systematic presentations of language based upon a selected techniques where the specific activities manifested in the classroom that were consistent with a method and therefore were in harmony with an approach as well. What they want us to call method is no longer at the center of our teaching philosophy. Changing mind and shifting sense. A glance through the past century or so of language teaching will give an interesting picture of how varied and interpretations have been of the best way to teach a foreign language. As disciplinary school of thought, psychology, linguistics, and educations, for example, have come and gone. So, have language teaching method waxed and went in popularity. Teaching method as approached in action are of course the practical applications of theoretical finding and position. In a field such as ours that is relatively young, it should come as no surprise to discover a variety of these applications over the last 100 years, some in total philosophical option to others. The grammar translations method. A historical sketch of the last 100 years of language teaching must be set in the context of a prevailing. Customary language teachings are traditional. For centuries there were few, if any, theoretical foundations of language learning upon which the best teaching methodology in the Western world. Foreign language learning in school was synonymous with the learning of Latin or Greek. Latin through the promote intellectually through mental gymnastic was until relatively recently held to be indispensable, has been called the classic method. Focus on grammatical rules, memorization of vocabulary and of various decisions and conjunction, translation of text, doing to end educate higher education. Latin was taught by means of what written exercises. Code and the series method. The history of modern foreign language teaching may be said to have begun In the late 1800s, with Francois Goin, a French teacher of Latin with remarkable insight. History doesn't normally credit Goin as a founder of language teaching methodology because at the time his influence was overshadowed by that of Charles Berlitz, the popular German founder of the direct method. Nevertheless, some attention to unusually perspective of observations about language teaching help us to set the stage for the development of language teaching method for the century following the publications of this book. The direct method. The naturalistic simulations, or the natural way in which children learn first languages approach of Goin and a few of his contemporaries did not take hold immediately. A generation later, applied linguistics finally established the credibility of such approach. This is what's that at the turn of the century, the direct method became quite widely known and practiced. The basic premise of the direct method was similar that of Gwyn's series method, namely that the second language learning should be more like first language learning, lot of oral interactions, spontaneous use of the language, no translations between first and second language, and little or no analysis research and research. The audiolingual method. In the first half of the 20th century, the direct method did not take hold in the US the way of modern foreign language in Europe. Such was not the case in the US. Also, European high school and university students did not have to travel far to find opportunities to put the oral skill of another language to actual practice use. Moreover, U.S. educational institute had become firmly convinced that a reading approach to foreign language was more useful than an oral approach, given the perspective linguistic isolation of the U.S. at the time. The highly influential foreign language teachers that it was impractical to teach oral skill and that reading should become the focus. Cognitive code learning. The age of audiolinguistics, with its emphasis on surface form and on the role ties of scientifically produced patterns, began to when the Chomsky in linguistics, turn linguistics and language teacher toward the deep structure of language, increasing interest and generative transformational grammar, and focus attention in the role governed nature of language and language acquisition. Let some language teaching programs to promote rather than the inductivity of the ALM. Last, beyond method, national functional syllabuses. It is important to emphasize in this historical sketch of methodology that the NFS did not necessarily develop communicative competence in learners. First, it was not a method which would specify how you would teach something. It was a syllabus, and while it was clearly a precursor to what we now call communicative language teaching, as a syllabus, it still presented language as an inventory of units, functional rather than grammatical units, but units nonetheless. Communicative competence implies a set of strategies for getting message sent and received and for negotiating meaning. As an interactive participant in discourse, whether spoken or written. Therefore, the danger that the NFS could simply be structural lamps serve up as nation function method. Then the NFS did indeed set the stage for bigger and better things by attending to the functional purposes of language by providing contextual setting for the realization of those purposes. I think that's all for my presentation. Thank you and see you next time.